when we are there. Got it. Hello, everyone. We are live at the Tucson Village of 4th Trimester, Arizona. My name's Eileen, and I'm the village lead. I am going to ask that my wonderful leader, supervisor, friend, Jenny, talk to us a little bit about our upcoming event in April.
Hi, thanks, Eileen. I'm so glad to be here on the Tucson Village today. So I think many of you know that we have our 4th trimester conference, and that's our signature event that happens every spring. It's happening again this year. Oh, and I pulled up the wrong one. Look at me. But it's happening again this year. This makes me laugh. It looks very similar. It's happening again this year on April 23rd. From 9 to 5. It will be virtual. There is a small cost associated with it. It's totally worth it. And if you are Wicker Access or if you need a scholarship to attend, please let us know. We're happy to make that happen. We want to make sure everybody can attend. I'm super excited that we have some wonderful speakers this year. One of my really exciting ones for me to hear is Managing Mom Rage, which I think maybe, I don't know, maybe no one else needs to hear, but I do. So if you go to our website, 4thtrimesteraz.org, you should be able to register. And we should have the website for that conference up this Friday as well. So I'm super excited about that. So yeah, make sure to join us, and I'll put in the right link in the chat for everybody.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.
Well, it's my honor this morning to invite two people that have dedicated their support and their time and their energy to learn more, to gain more information, and to support moms. And it's really something that 4th trimester is all about. Rachel, I'm going to start with her. She's an advocate for parental mental health. She's a breastfeeding peer counselor through Pima County WIC program, Women, Infant, and Children. She's a licensed master social worker. And in her work, Rachel focuses on helping parents become confident, supported, emotionally aware people inside and out of their roles as caregivers. Rachel's the mother of 2 under 6. She's married and she's a native Tucsonan. And she enjoys long drives in the desert and sewing. Now I'm honored to introduce Tiffany. Tiffany is a full spectrum doula, a childbirth educator, and a birth photographer. Tiffany has a passion for maternal mental health and is the survivor of multiple PMADs. And she's going to explain to you what a PMAD stands for. Her goal as a doula and educator are to support, guide, empower, and nurture families as they navigate parenthood. Tiffany was born and raised in California and has lived in Yuma, Gilbert, and came to Tucson in 2020. Tiffany's the mother of 2 children, married, enjoys reading and listening to podcasts, and her self-care includes acupuncture, and she also has a passion for helping cats. Rachel and Tiffany have completed the necessary requirements to become our Postpartum Support International Support Coordinators for Pima County and Yuma. As support coordinators, they provide emotional support and education to the perinatal community and connect help seekers to resources, including appropriate support groups and therapists. They can be reached by phone and email to answer any questions or concerns that you may have. And that information we will share as we go through this presentation. I also just want to remind everybody who's on the call, on Zoom, on Facebook Live, to take care of yourself. We're going to talk about some things that were tough for lots of different people, but we also want you to remember that you're not alone and there is support. And that's the biggest reason why we're bringing this to the forefront. So please take care of yourself in any way that you need to. Thank you so much for being here. If you ever want to reach out to me, go ahead and do that. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany and Rachel and have them go ahead and get started. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to try to share my screen here. I practiced this 1,000 times, but you know that that means nothing. Let's see. All right. All right, so can somebody tell me real quick if you can see the slide that says Postpartum Support International?
Yes.
Yes,
All
we
right. Perfect, thank you. So thanks for that introduction, Eileen. Tiffany and I are happy to be here and really start digging in and providing outreach through our role at PSI. We're both relatively new. We started in October of last year. And we have been just really grateful to be able to help our communities in the way that we have so far. This is a little bit of what we're going to go through today, what are PMADs, kind of how to recognize them in your own life or somebody else's. We'll go through our stories. We're going to get a little bit vulnerable. And then we will end with some resources that Postpartum Support International provides specifically, which can be a good jumping off point to settle into what's going to work for you or somebody that you know. And then we will end with a little discussion about what we wish we knew. So first of all, what are PMADs? So that stands for Perinatal Mood and Anxiety Disorders. So we most often think of postpartum depression, which certainly can be the most common one. But in reality, these mood disorders occur anytime in pregnancy to the first year postpartum. And as you'll see in Tiffany and mine's story, the ripple effects go past the first year. So it's really a much longer range of time than we think of with postpartum. It can cover depression. It can also cover bipolar disorder, psychosis, anxiety, panic, OCD, PTSD, anything that you can think of can be related. And of course, they are a disorder, which means that they interfere with the functioning and day-to-day life. And this sort of exists on a spectrum for everybody. What might be disrupted for one person is not disrupted for another. So you kind of have to know yourself and what you're willing and able to function with. So I'll go through some statistics that you might not know. Perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, or PMADs, are more common than gestational hypertension, preeclampsia, and gestational diabetes combined. That makes it the #1 complication of childbirth. It affects 1 in 5 to 7 new moms. And that number is higher for moms of color. 1 in 3 will experience a PMAD. And dads and partners are not immune. 1 in 10 dads have been found to be affected by PMADs. So if you do an internet search, especially if you end up on postpartum.net, which is PSI's website, you'll find symptom lists similar to this in the slides that follow. It's important to know that these symptoms can, as we said, start anytime during pregnancy or the first year postpartum, and they differ for everybody. It can look so different. We'll start with depression here. Approximately 15% of women experience significant depression following childbirth and 10% in pregnancy. In fact, perinatal depression is the most common complication of childbearing, which we talked about before. Depression can look like feelings of anger, irritability, and a lack of interest, a loss of joy and pleasure and things that you used to enjoy. You can have feelings of guilt, shame, hopelessness, those crying episodes that can be frequent or just seemingly uncontrollable, and possible thoughts of harming the baby or yourself. Over here on the other side, we have anxiety. Sometimes women can experience anxiety alone or in addition to depression. And it's sort of that constant worry. It's what if this happens? What if this happens? What if the baby does this? What if I do this? And just always feeling like something bad is going to happen. Those racing thoughts, you can hardly keep up. Appetite changes, which can include rapid weight loss, and difficulty falling asleep and staying asleep. So when I used to get so irritated when people would say, just sleep when the baby sleeps. I tried. I had the opportunity. I could not fall asleep or stay asleep, even if I had a couple hours to myself. It wasn't going to happen for me. Anxiety can also include postpartum panic disorder, where the sufferer feels nervous and has recurring panic attacks. So next we'll talk about OCD, postpartum OCD. It's the most misunderstood and misdiagnosed of the perinatal disorders. You don't have to be diagnosed with OCD to experience these common symptoms. Sort of the hallmarks are the obsessions or intrusive thoughts we say a lot, which are the persistent repetitive thoughts or mental images related to the baby. They can be very upsetting. And can feel, like something that you've not experienced before. There's also the compulsions, which can be related to these intrusive thoughts, where the person kind of develops routines like constantly cleaning, checking over and over and over again, to kind of manage those fears and obsessions that have come about. The person has a sense of horror about these intrusive thoughts. They fear being left alone with the baby. They're hypervigilant. They know that their thoughts are bizarre, and that can kind of be what separates it from psychosis. But it can be extremely upsetting. So kind of a little bit more on intrusive thoughts. They can be very frightening and feel like they come out of the blue, but research has shown that these images are anxious in nature, not delusional, and have a very low risk of being acted upon. And Tiffany's going to share more later about these intrusive thoughts. PTSD over on the right, approximately 9% of women experience postpartum post-traumatic stress disorder following childbirth. Most often it's caused by real or perceived trauma during delivery or postpartum, such as a prolapsed cord, unplanned C-section, use of vacuum extractor, the baby going to the NICU, hyperemesis gravidarum during pregnancy, which is nausea and vomiting way past the point of morning sickness, and just general feelings of powerlessness and poor communication or lack of support during the delivery. Women who have experienced a previous trauma like rape or sexual abuse are also at a higher risk for experiencing postpartum PTSD, as are women who experience severe physical complication or injury related to pregnancy or childbirth, like a hemorrhage, unexpected hysterectomy, severe preeclampsia, and perinatal trauma, like a 3rd or 4th degree tear. I'll spend a brief amount of time on bipolar disorder and psychosis. So in pregnant and postpartum women, bipolar depression can look like a very severe depression or might be experienced as anxiety. For this reason, it's very important that if you or someone you know feels that they might be having this, that they talk about your mood history, make sure it's reviewed and assessed for whether you've had times of persistently elevated moods, decreased need for sleep, and periods of over average productivity. Bipolar 2 in particular can look like postpartum depression, as the manic episode is less apparent. It's just very important that you are seeking support from a trusted provider who has knowledge of these things, and that you're open about your history. There are risk factors that make bipolar disorder more likely: a history of psychotic episodes, a family history, personal history of bipolar disorder. It can overlap with psychosis many times. And so we'll talk about psychosis, which can occur by itself as well, not just with postpartum disorder. Psychosis itself is rare. It occurs in approximately 1 to 2 out of every 1,000 deliveries. And the onset is usually sudden, most often within the first 2 weeks postpartum. And the symptoms can wax and wane. They sort of come and go. You can be thinking and feeling fine, and then you're sort of thrust back into these psychotic symptoms. You'll notice that some of the symptoms can overlap with bipolar, anxiety, depression, and other things: the hyperactivity, the irritation, sort of rapid mood swings. But the hallmark symptoms here are the delusions or strange beliefs that you believe at the time, and hallucinations. Psychosis is frequently an emergency. So if you or someone you know is experiencing these things, seek support from a trusted provider, and call the crisis line if you need to. If you're feeling in danger or that others are in danger. So those are sort of the more clinical looks for symptoms, and Tiffany is going to take us through this tool here to get an idea of what these things might look like in day-to-day life.
Hi everyone, I'm Tiffany. This is the PSI Perinatal Mental Health Discussion Tool. It's a really good resource to print off if you're questioning what you're experiencing and might have concerns to discuss with your care provider. Here you can see that there are many symptoms that you can choose to check all that apply. There are, feeling depressed, hopelessness, a lack of interest in the baby or difficulty bonding with the baby, trouble concentrating, brain fog, feeling anxious, panicky, having dizziness or heart palpitations, not being able to sleep when the baby sleeps, like Rachel mentioned before, extreme worries or fears, flashbacks regarding the pregnancy, the delivery, avoiding things related to delivery, and seeing images or hearing sounds that others can't see, et cetera, as you can see here. Next slide, Rachel. And here we have a lot of risk factors. There is history of depression, anxiety, history of psychosis, history of sexual abuse or trauma, family history of mental illness, a traumatic pregnancy or delivery, a history of infant loss, baby in the NICU, birth of multiples, having relationship issues, financial struggles, no or little social support, being a teen mom or a single mom, being away from home currently, or challenges with breastfeeding. Go to the next slide, Rachel. We wanted to include this because this next slide does have semi-specific intrusive thoughts. So please feel free to mute or turn away from your screen for about half a minute. And when we move on to the next topic, you will see that the screen says Our Stories. So we wanted to talk about intrusive thoughts a little bit more in depth because we feel that this is one of the lesser discussed and more severe experiences that women can go through in the perinatal or postpartum period. Here are a list of very common specific intrusive thoughts that women can experience, such as, what if I drop the baby, suffocate the baby, stab the baby, drown the baby, and sexually abuse the baby in particular was one that I experienced and was caught completely off guard, was totally horrified and thought that I was the only person in the world to have been going through this, and poison the baby. I experienced all of these common intrusive thoughts, which I'll get into later. These repetitive and intrusive images and thoughts are very, very frightening. They can feel like they come out of nowhere, out of the blue, and research has shown that these thoughts are anxious in nature and have a very low risk of being acted upon. They come from a place of just wanting to protect your baby. So with that being said, we are going to go into our stories, and I will do my best to try and sum this up quickly. It's a bit long. So due to our limited amount of time, I'm going to significantly attempt to condense my story, and much will be left out. We could talk about this for hours. So if you want to know more or you have any questions about what is shared here today, please do feel free to contact me or Rachel anytime. I want to preface this before I dive in that this is my personal journey that I will be sharing, and sharing what I did in attempts to help myself. In no way am I giving medical advice, and this is most important, that there is no one right way to do this. So with that being said, my experience was majorly transformative. Both of my pregnancies and postpartums cracked me to the core, forever changing me. They were the catalyst that got me to finally begin working on healing my entire life's trauma, practice self-compassion, and learn self-love. With the birth of my first child here in this photo, I began the process of questioning, and that left me more open than I would have been otherwise with my second. Because of my previous relationship and experience with medications in my life, I was unwilling to go that route again in my second pregnancy and postpartum. Of the risk factors I just showed you on the discussion tool slide, I have about 10 that were listed and a few that aren't, such as like CPTSD, neurodivergence, a history of sexual trauma and abuse, family history of mental illness, relationship issues, financial struggles, et cetera, et cetera. As I previously mentioned, I was a young mother. I got pregnant with my son quickly at the age of 23, and I was at the tail end of my process of tapering off of psych medications when I conceived him. I was hoping to finally experience life without medications after 11 years on. And to my disappointment, and due to the nature of the pregnancy, I needed to quickly get back on medication for anxiety, stress, depression, and rage that I was experiencing. I was monitored more often to ensure that my son was developing as he should due to the medication risks, which increased anxiety. He was born spontaneously a couple weeks early in October of 2011. I had a medicated vaginal birth that, looking back, did leave me with some minor birth trauma, but thankfully overall went well. At the time of my son's birth, I was also losing my father, and he passed when my son was just 6 months old. The grief of that loss at that time was very intense, and I did initially have some struggles with coping, but I managed to pull myself together and carry on as I was the sole caregiver of my son at that time. While I wasn't completely without a support system, I struggled maintaining and navigating relationships due to my symptoms. And I completed my process of tapering off medications entirely when my son was around 2.5 years old. Fast forward to my daughter's pregnancy, I was 28 when I conceived her, and I was feeling or felt stress raising my neurodivergent son and navigating relationship challenges with their father. She was born in July of 2016, the night before her estimated due date. So this was a longer pregnancy than my first, and that created a whole different anxiety. The transition from one child to two was extremely challenging. There was much guilt over trying to balance everyone's needs while I was suffering. My experience with her started in the second trimester of pregnancy, and at this time around, it was manifesting completely different than before. This is when intrusive thoughts and contamination/harm OCD began for me. Due to the nature of my intrusive thoughts, I was too ashamed and too afraid to mention this to anyone, even my care providers. So I suffered silently through it, and this is when I began to withdraw and avoid. I was thoroughly convinced, as I had mentioned before, that I was the only one who had experienced this, and had a crippling fear that if I was honest and open about the intrusive thoughts that I was experiencing, that I would lose my children to CPS or end up in a psych ward. I had an unmedicated vaginal birth this time around with a doula support. Additionally, at this point, I was an educated doula myself, but even that didn't save me. Looking back now, I did walk away from her birth with minor birth trauma as well, but overall felt proud of the experience. Almost instantly, things ramped up postpartum, and I began experiencing new symptoms such as trouble eating, trouble sleeping, rapid weight loss, hopelessness, and intense fears, which was the OCD, specifically contamination and fear of illness. So the paranoia that I would harm my children in my sleep without realizing it and wake up to discover them gone. In addition to this, my newborn had oral ties, which caused breastfeeding to be incredibly painful and much more difficult than the first time around. This really messed up my confidence, and the intrusive thoughts continued and consumed every aspect of my life. As you'll see in the next photo that Rachel will put, I couldn't even take my kids to the park without intense anxiety and stress, being paralyzed with worry that they would get sick. And at this point, I was so exhausted, I just didn't have the capacity to deal with that. Not only was I struggling mentally, emotionally, I was physically and socially isolated from all family and friends. I found myself systemically unsupported. I began to experience multiple confusing and startling physical symptoms too, which fueled my fear of I'm going to die and my children will be left without me. So that's when I began reaching out to medical care providers for help, although I never divulged my intrusive thoughts due to fear of judgment. And the help that they offered was not help at all. They dismissed what I was experiencing physically and implied that this was all in my head. And instead of hearing me and exploring any internal root cause, the only solution that I was offered was medication. I endured many difficult and painful roadblocks on my journey to seek relief and answers. Eventually, after exhaustive research and a multitude of attempts to find support in my community, I branched out to other areas in Arizona for help. And this is when things began to turn around just slightly for me. I began care under a naturopath virtually and finally got some validation and confirmation that I was desperately seeking, that there were indeed physiological factors contributing. It took me nearly a full 2 years of trial and error to find the right therapist and get the help that I needed to begin my process of recovery and healing. And in the time that it took me to find her, there were some books that were a stepping stone to kind of carry me through. On this next slide, we will show some books that I found supportive and some that I wish I would have known about at the time. Even now, many of these resources are still supporting me in my healing and parenting journey. So please feel free to write down any book titles that may speak to you or any resources here that you feel might be helpful. I wanted to share some help that worked for me. Like I had previously mentioned, there were these books, having worked with a naturopath or finding a functional medicine doctor to check for things like hormonal imbalances, thyroid dysfunction, etc. Listening to Louise Hay affirmations were very helpful at the time in soothing my anxiety. Body work such as acupuncture, chiropractic, pelvic floor, and most importantly, psychotherapy with the right person, both individual and couples, has been extremely important for me in my journey. Some ongoing practices that I feel are very helpful would be accepting my feelings without judgment, adjusting expectations of motherhood, practicing self-forgiveness and compassion, baby steps, which is really important, just taking even 1 minute or 1 second at a time. And there was a YouTube video that my therapist had sent me that I found to be really helpful and comforting, or descriptive of what I was experiencing, which is called Falling in the Hole. You can find this on YouTube. And again, I just want to say, none of this is medical advice. This is just my personal journey. And with that being said, I want to hand it over to Rachel to share her story.
All right, sorry about that. My little bar at the top that gave me the option to unmute disappeared. So here I am. So my story, it's a little bit different than Tiffany's. What I experienced was just kind of a small sliver of the broad range of things that you can experience with a perinatal mood disorder, which, sort of helped it fly under the radar for me. I had very few, if any, risk factors. I was pretty well set up for a smooth transition to parenthood, on paper. I was 27 when I got pregnant for the first time. I had no apparent family history or personal history of mental health issues. I had a healthy and respectful village of family close by. I had a supportive partner that had a decent amount of parental leave for Arizona. Still it took me a while to recognize or accept that something might be just a little bit off. So my first baby, this is my daughter. She was born in 2016. I had a happy and uncomplicated pregnancy and a pretty smooth vaginal birth. But despite the pretty easy pregnancy and delivery, I struggled to adjust to postpartum life. I had wanted to be a mom my whole life. And I saw myself giving up this pre-mom life happily and gratefully and just kind of sailing through it on air, just, living my dream. There we go. But that transition and just how difficult it was for me to be entirely on someone else's schedule took me by surprise. There's sort of a theme in my story of control. When I don't have that control, I'm not feeling safe. So I did not enjoy having a newborn, you guys. I loved her more than anything else in the world, but I was not having fun. Aside from waking multiple times in the night, and I'm talking every hour or two for the first year. We had a significant breastfeeding issues that made it almost impossible for me to leave my home for more than a couple hours at a time for a while. Like about 80% of new moms, I experienced the baby blues in the first 2 weeks, but these feelings lifted and were mostly gone by about 2 weeks, and they didn't come back. My daughter was 18 months old when I got pregnant with my son. I had fleeting moments of rage, which increased in frequency as my pregnancy progressed, but not to where I felt it was something I needed help with. My son's birth was quick and chaotic, nothing like the almost zen experience of my daughter's birth. I felt out of control, and this feeling continued for a few months and compounded on the same feelings of sadness I had with my daughter in the first 2 weeks, and brought with it feelings of regret for upending our lives with a new baby just as we were getting comfortable. Our breastfeeding issues were at least as significant as they were with my daughter, and if possible, this little boy slept even less than she did. Unlike with my daughter, I didn't bond with my son right away. It took about a month for me to feel that connection, that he was my child and that I would do anything for him. Like with my daughter, the feelings of sadness only lasted 2 weeks, and I was eventually able to process my son's chaotic birth and feel grounded again. I like showing these candid shots of how messy motherhood is. It's nice to have those posed shots, but my hair looked like this for a good while. So, despite processing the baby blues lifting after a couple weeks and processing that chaotic birth, the moments of rage, which had been fleeting and rare, resurfaced and intensified. It was now difficult to hide these moments of significant and frankly scary temper flare-ups from my daughter, especially she was often the trigger, that sweet little girl, such a powerful trigger. I had flare-ups that resulted in me speed walking barefoot around my neighborhood at 3 a.m., screaming as loud as I could in my car and slamming doors. After an outburst, I, of course, immediately felt crushed with guilt, and I told myself I was a mean, scary, and unsafe mom. I told myself I needed to do better and searched for all kinds of anger management strategies. One was that I wore elastic bands on one wrist, and every time I had an explosion, I would have to move it to the other side and sort of make it up to my daughter to be able to move it back. And I walked around with a little smooth rock to hold on to. I would actually get really upset when I couldn't find the rock. And I tried deep breathing and affirmations first thing in the morning. But still, when the triggers came, I felt powerless, almost like I was flung from my body, and what was left was a rage monster I had no control over. And even with repeated failures, as I called the outbursts in my mind, I told myself I didn't deserve outside help because this just must be who I am as a mom, and I needed to change it myself. Since I only felt rage and not hopelessness, sadness, panic, or thoughts of self-harm, I thought this was not related to any legitimate postpartum mental health issue, and that's not something that I was justified in seeking help for managing. I love, Jenny, that you mentioned Dr. Jessica Kaffer is going to be speaking on mom rage. I was so excited to see that announcement. It is such a common thing that we don't want to talk about. There's a stigma with it. And I definitely felt that during this time. I mean, you may be surprised to know that at this time I had already completed a master's degree in social work, and I had worked in the field. At this time, this was actually a barrier to me getting help. I felt that with all my knowledge, I should be able to, quote, treat myself, which is ridiculous. Now looking back, I know that I was too close to the situation to be able to see the big picture. So a number of things happened between 9 and 12 months postpartum that led me to finally connecting with a therapist. I came across an article on the internet with the phrase postpartum rage in the headline. That was the first time I had heard that. It was a story about a mom experiencing the same explosions of temper I did, directed many times at her small child to the extent that she feared she might unintentionally hurt him with her wrath. This gave me words to search, and suddenly some control was within my grasp. I found that rage was indeed a common symptom of depression and anxiety, but often just represented under the vague descriptor of irritability. I was not irritable. I was way beyond that. I discovered that not all people even have most of the symptoms on the symptom list and can experience just one or two, like I was. Around this time, I also heard a friend mention her own experience with postpartum depression, which manifested primarily as anger for her, and she finally sought medication from her doctor. Another friend disclosed to me that one of her primary symptoms was also rage, for which she was currently in therapy and had found it more related to anxiety for her than depression. And this was kind of an aha moment for me, because anxiety felt like a much better fit for me and who I was. I had never identified much with depression. People I knew felt what I felt and were getting help. Finally, the event that pushed me over the edge into therapy was a particularly difficult night where my son wouldn't sleep, and I had spent all day with him and had no time to myself. As those feelings of rage exploded quicker than I could even realize that they were there, I had thrown the baby monitor, smashing it into pieces across my tile floor. I immediately texted my mom, consumed with guilt and regret, and she said the magic words, "This is not you. You need to get help." And finally, I had permission. I found a therapist that validated my experience and just how difficult it was to manage all the things I had going on. It helped to have 1 hour a week just to talk through my experiences in a quiet place. Eventually, I was able to find strategies to put me back in control of my temper. I didn't end up staying with that therapist, as she wasn't a good fit long-term, but that's okay. She got me started, and now I'm continuing to work on myself with a therapist who is a better fit for me. I absolutely continue to this day have moments where I feel more irritated than the situation calls for. I have times where I react with a louder voice and harsher words than I would like to. I'm very far from being that fun, playful, just a chill mom that I always imagined I would be. But I don't have those moments of feeling completely out of control like I used to. I feel much safer now. So, as a summary, sort of the things that helped me to seek help was hearing and seeing my story from other people, seeing people get trust. This article that I show on the right, was one of the things that kicked off legitimizing what I was going through. And it was an older version of this article, but the quote down at the bottom, "Whatever prompts it to appear, postpartum rage generally comes with a sense of being out of control of your anger. It just doesn't feel like you, but you feel powerless to control it. In fact, you've tried to get a handle on it and you just can't. No amount of deep breathing is getting you out of this one." And that really hit me, because that was me. And ongoing growth is incredibly important. Therapy with the right provider. I'm learning to anticipate my triggers and sort of, expect them and put on that shell that I need to. Finding techniques to help me pause before reacting. There are many. And the important thing is to find the one that works for you. Breathing doesn't work for everybody. Breathing actually made it worse for me. And I think that's the anxiety side. Sitting still and trying to focus on the breathing sort of heightened me a little bit in the moment. So I had to find other things. We often call anger a secondary emotion. So examining that anxiety that's hiding under everything, putting myself first when I need it, planning for childcare in time and budget so that I can have breaks, and using kinder growth-centered language. So when I was calling myself a mean and unsafe mom, that had to go. That was not helping me. And so we wanted to tell you guys a little bit about Postpartum Support International. It can be a good jumping off point for you or somebody that you know if you feel like you're experiencing some of these things. This is the website. Write it down, www.postpartum.net. There's also a Facebook group down there at the bottom. Arizona has its own chapter, and on their website, you can get to support coordinators, which are Tiffany and I, a little bit quicker than you can on the main site. And then there's also some local resources. So we'll focus on 3 resources offered by PSI. There are many. I really encourage you to explore the website. Sort of the first line is the helpline. It's a toll-free number anyone can call to get basic information, support, and encouragement, and also online resources that anyone can access. The helpline, it's for really all of the support that PSI offers, is for the birthing person and also their family and support people. We recognize that it's a big picture, it's a community issue, not a women's issue. So this, this warm line, it is a warm line, which means that calls and texts are not answered live, but they're returned as quickly as possible every day of the week. The helpline will also eventually, if it's appropriate, connect you with Tiffany or I, or your local support coordinator for your area. The helpline is not a crisis line, though. They don't handle emergencies. We have the Tucson crisis line down there at the bottom, or you can text talk to 741-741 if you are feeling unsafe. And then please seek PSI when you're in a more stable place. So here we have support coordinators. I'm going to try something fancy with this technology here. So bear with me. All right. Control Tab and ta-da. All right, so this is postpartum.net. This is how you find Tiffany or I, or other support coordinators. You'll go over here, hover over Get Help. You'll go to Find Local Support, United States, we'll say Arizona, and then right here at the bottom, support coordinators. It lists us all, but not our contact information. This is a new thing. You'll just fill out this connect with a local volunteer. It's a short little survey just to get some quick information, and then it'll be passed on to the support coordinator that's most local to you. And then we will reach out within 24 hours. Like I said, you can find us a little bit quicker on the Arizona chapter. You're just clicking on that Get Help. It brings you down here, and there we are. Let me get back to my PowerPoint. Wow, that was smooth. So a little bit about what we do as local coordinators. We are trained volunteers. We provide support and encouragement and information like the helpline does, but we have the benefit of knowing more about local resources, and we maintain a local resource list of support groups and therapists. We're sort of constantly contacting therapists to see, do you really accept this insurance? Are you taking new people right now? Because if you have ever looked for a therapist, you know that it can be exhausting. And when you found somebody who looks good and you call them and they're not taking anybody, it can end your search for a long time. So let us do that legwork. We are happy to do that. PSI also has specialized coordinators, and they work in conjunction with us to provide encouragement and support and resources in these particular areas. And these areas are constantly developing as we get response and requests from families. So you can see there's, specialized support coordinators for families with a NICU baby, teen and young adult moms, PTSD, adoptive parents. I just recently sent a help seeker the information for the colic specialized support coordinator, for example. And then so I will hand it over to Tiffany to talk about this next support. Tiffany, do you want me to show how to find the groups on the website real quick, or do you want me to do that after you talk about the groups?
Let's do it after. I'll just
Okay.
read this really quickly, and then you can go ahead and show them how to do it.
Okay.
So PSI has many online peer support groups that are free. They are casual virtual support groups in a variety of areas that are facilitated by a trained volunteer. You register at the website for an account to access these free groups. They are about 90 minutes long. The first 30 minutes is providing information and education and establishing groups guidelines. The next 60 minutes are talk time in which members will share and talk with each other, and these groups are kept small, so they are intimate. And yeah, next, go ahead and show them how to find the groups, Rachel. Oh, do you want me to do the next slide? I'll just do the next slide.
All right.
So there are specialty sort of support groups that I wanted to talk to you about, you know, like the dad support group, military moms, NICU parents, mental health support for special needs and medically fragile parenting, perinatal OCD for moms, psychosis support groups, queer and trans parent support groups, etc. On the next slide, you'll see that there's also Spanish speaking support groups, post-abortion support groups, and groups for infant loss or fertility challenges, and people touched by psychosis. Okay, Rachel, go ahead and show them how to get there on the website.
Oh, right. So here we are back at, we're trying to be back at postpartum.net. All right, so you're going to postpartum.net, www.postpartum.net. Hover over this Get Help here under PSI services. There's online support groups. You can see a list of the groups here, more information. There's the times and descriptions of the groups. And then you'll click on this purple when you're ready, and then you'll register for a free account. And the platform that they use is Hey Peers. And then after you register, you'll be able to actually attend a support group. It's not the screen. It was going so well. Here we go.
So with that being said, we wanted to go ahead and bring to our activity and wrap up our slide, our presentation, and ask you, what do you wish you knew? So go ahead and take about 5 minutes or something like that. We'll see how it goes. And just think about some things that you wish you knew, and then we will share ours. I just wanted to mention too, if you're not comfortable sharing here while we are Facebook Live, we will be turning that off and then going just to the Zoom, so you can wait to share there if that's more comfortable for you.
And feel free to share in the chat as well.
Ah, yes, the chat box. Thank you for everyone who's commenting in the chat box. I love your shares. They're very, very beautiful. How long has it been, Rachel? I can't see with my phone on. It's taking my
I
screen.
wasn't timing it, but it feels like a good time to come back to the discussion to me.
Yeah, okay. So, Rachel, how about you go first and share what you wish you knew?
Yeah, so I wish I knew that I did not need permission from anyone or anything outside of myself to ask for help. That it was enough that I was being affected and that I wanted my postpartum experience to be better. That's enough reason to ask for help. That's more than enough.
Yes. Okay, I have so many what I wish I knew, so I will try to just keep it down to like one or two because it's endless. But I wish I knew that what I was experiencing was it's a very real thing, and that I wasn't alone. I'm not alone. That it's normal and common. And I wish I would have known and realized just exactly how isolated I was and how to fix that, and how to find good, safe help. Does anybody want to share what they wish they knew here while we're on this, or do you want to, if you want to wait, that's okay too, but we want to give you an opportunity to share if you'd like to.
This
Maybe
is
read.
This
Go
is
ahead,
Eileen. I just want to share, first of all, how powerful your presentation has been and your resources that you gave us. We're going to have to repost some of them because they are so helpful. I wish I knew, and I put this in the chat, about sleep deprivation. And I am a napper. I can nap any day, anytime from the time I was little. I was one of those kids that would come home from school and nap. So sleeping when the baby sleeps was never helpful, like you were saying, Rachel. So that's one of the things that I'm so glad that you talked about, because I share that with families. Figure out how you're going to get your sleep, because it can trigger so many other things. So thank you so much for that. Anybody else?
Samantha had mentioned that she'd like to share. You ready, Samantha?
Yes, I wish that I had known that what I was going through was OCD and intrusive thoughts, because I really thought that something was extremely wrong with me and that I didn't deserve to be a mom. And, that's when I started having a lot of suicidal thoughts and stuff, because what I thought I was going through is just like me, like this, I'm just a bad person. I'm a bad mother. I don't deserve to have kids. I wish I had looked for help sooner too, as well, instead of just keeping it all in and just wanting to sleep the day away.
Thank you for sharing, Samantha.
Of course.
Is there anyone else that would like to share before we get off of Facebook Live?
Well,
Okay,
Jenny,
Sarah.
yeah.
Looks like
Sarah wants to share.
Yeah, I agree with all of you. And I do want to, from my perspective, say thank you again for you guys sharing and being so vulnerable, because I think that the more and more real people we see and hear telling their real stories, the more we validate everyone's experiences in this stage of life after having kids, no matter what number of kid you're on. For me, I have 5 kids, and all my kids were very close together. They were within 2 years of each other. My second one, I tasted freedom, or sorry, not second one, my second to last one, the 4th kid. And then we ended up getting pregnant and having another one. And we love them all dearly, but it was definitely a blow to my system, both physically and mentally. And I think that some of the biggest things I wish I had known were that rage was such a prevalent symptom for so many moms out there in the postpartum, because I was just mad at everything, mad at the world, mad at the kids, mad at the house, mad because outside was hot. Like, I mean, it was nonsense, you know, like, I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, we live in Arizona. It's going to be hot. No, I was mad about it, you know, and not like a, oh my gosh, why do we live here? And why is it so hot? Like that we kind of do every summer, even though we know. It was more than that. It was like an actual anger at it being so hot, you know, like the littlest things like that. And I wish I had known, because I think I would have started to look for help earlier. And the other thing that I wish I had known, and you guys did mention this in your presentation part of it, was that postpartum concerns like this don't always happen early on after baby's born. A lot of times they're happening later. And that was the case for me. I did not, certainly I may have had symptoms earlier than I acknowledged them, but I did not realize and get very bad in what I consider bad for myself until my youngest was 3. And, you know, 2-3 years old was the worst time for me. It probably compounded by the fact that I had lots of other kids, but at the same time, it was rough. So yeah, I think those would be the 2 biggest things for me.
Thank you for sharing, Sarah.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate you all.
So on
Anybody
this last
else?
slide, I just wanted to read our sort of slogan for PSI, because we want everyone, the biggest takeaways we want everyone to have from this presentation is that you are not alone, you are not to blame, and with help you will be well. So if you haven't done so yet, go ahead, and if you're interested in doing so, go ahead and write down our numbers or our emails. If you have any questions, or if you want to talk more or just have any further conversation about this, this is our contact information, and you can go ahead and write that down before it's taken off the screen. And then Eileen or Jenny, I don't know, whoever wants to finish this, but I am passing it over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much. This is so powerful. And I agree with what everybody had mentioned about the fact that raising awareness about the struggles that every family goes through. It may look rosy on the outside, and mental illness does not necessarily have it's not a disability that people see when they see somebody. So we have to be kind and conscious of everybody out there. So thank you again from the bottom of my heart.